Husserl, you soon discover that he spent most of his energies trying to develop the method and left other people to use it. That may be an overgeneralization. He does do, for instance, a phenomenology of time consciousness. Time consciousness. And time is no ordinary object of thought, anything post-Kantian. Because if time is the unifying form of all consciousness, it's the form, you remember, of the internal sense. But even our ideas of the external sense are known to us in the internal sense, and so they are time-organized as well. So the whole world for me is time-organized. Well, what he's trying to do there is to do a phenomenology of that time consciousness, which is really getting at the heart of the Kantian sort of thing. His earlier works, things like the foundations of mathematics and logical investigations, are attempts to do the kind of phenomenology which would establish the foundations in the universal structure of the self of mathematics. That is to say, of logic. You see, the foundations of logic. In fact, this little book of Husserl, Phenomenology and the Crisis of Philosophy, actually contains two essays of his. One is entitled Philosophy as Rigorous Science. His point being that none of the other sciences is rigorous because none of them has underlying foundation that validates scientific method. Not even logic does. Mathematics doesn't. So he's calling out for a philosophy which will establish those foundations. The second is called, let's see, full title, Philosophy as Rigorous Science. Let's see. Oh, I wrote it down. Let's see. Yeah, The Crisis of European Science and Transcendental Phenomenology. Now you can see what he's after there. The crisis, no adequate foundations. The whole thing's in danger of getting relativized. And transcendental phenomenology, yes, a phenomenology of the transcendental self which will arrest that process and establish adequate foundations. So that's the overarching concern, Husserl. And it inspired a whole following of people. I remember back in the, when would it be? Oh, in the 1960s, I guess it was. I attended a meeting of the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy out of Yale. And that meeting, as people were standing around in the lobby of the meeting place, people would come up to you, assuming that you were of like mind with them, and rave in almost messianic tones about the projects they were involved in. Increased numbers from last year, it looks like we're gaining ground. That sort of thing, a real messianic kind of spirit to it that was sort of fascinating to catch that enthusiasm, which it's almost a religious enthusiasm. It was interesting to see. Well, Hegel, pause for comment. Hegel, Husserl, pause for comment, question. Okay, you'll find that Stumpf is pretty clear on this. He's also good on Heidegger, so be sure to use that. Now, let me take then the next step from Husserl to Heidegger himself. And here in Heidegger, you have not transcendental phenomenology, phenomenology of the transcendental self, but existential phenomenology, phenomenology of existence. Heidegger is no longer concerned to establish a new kind of foundationalism. That's not his project. The problem with Husserl is that that process of bracketing is never completed. So that you simply cannot strip the transcendental self bare of the evidence of this, that, or the other kind of object of knowing, and catch it, as it were, in its dance. It's as if Heidegger is saying to Husserl what Hume said to Descartes or Locke, who had talked about having a notion of a substantive soul, even over and above all of the particular ideas of sensation and reflection and everything else of which we're immediately aware. To which Hume replied, I never catch myself without some idea. Well, it's as if Heidegger is saying the same to Husserl. You never catch the hyphen without the unjet. You never catch the intentional state, bare, unclothed with objects. And so he has to part company with Heidegger's optimism about a method of establishing some rigorous foundation, new foundationalism. Incidentally, I think Heidegger's right in that. It seems to me that any attempt you might make to bracket presuppositions, bracket reference to some particular object, is going to be very difficult. It's a kind of abstraction, thinking of the hyphen relationship in abstraction. But the very nature of thinking abstractly, abstract ideas, is that it always takes off from particulars. And such particulars become symbols of something much greater than that. Yes, so that the difficulty involved there is the difficulty in abstract thinking that does not have some point of reference, which makes possible meaningful symbolic language. Well, instead then of what Husserl is doing, what Heidegger proposes to do is to use this phenomenological method of describing structures of things, to use this on conscious existence, on human existence, do a phenomenology of human existence. That is to say, what Husserl's method involved was not only the bracketing, but I see I rubbed it off, eidetic intuition. Eidetic having to do with ideas, where idea, you remember, was Plato's term for the forms, the ideals, the universals, the essences. So eidetic intuition is an immediate awareness of those universal essences, of the universal structures of consciousness. And what Husserl was wanting to do is to describe what one finds, what one observes, in that eidetic intuition, like intentionality. Well, what Heidegger wants to do is to focus not on some universal structure of consciousness underlying all knowing, but to focus on universal structures of existence, what are called existentialia. Existentialia. Now, what he's trying to do is to distinguish categories of objects from the existential qualities of the human subject. Let's see, what are the universal existential characteristics of being in this world? Existential referring to the conditions of the subject in this world. So that the hyphen becomes not a knowing relationship, but a being in relationship, with all the existential qualities that entails. Now, at the same time, as he's dissatisfied with Husserl, he also has problems with other existentialists. People like Nietzsche, even Jaspers. He refers to all sorts of them. Because what they are doing, he calls simply the elucidation of existence. Yeah, they're trying to elucidate the way in which we feel, the way in which we experience our existence, the elucidation of our existence. Oh, they may be trying to elicit some authentic existence, the elucidation and eliciting of existence. In other words, what they're doing is abandoning any traditional philosophical activity. The traditional philosophy, all the way back to the Greeks, was concerned with being, capital B, not just elucidating our existence in the world. So that the Greeks were interested in the arche, the basic stuff, if you like, in the ground of all being. You see, in the ground of being. So what Heidegger wants to do is to look at our, incidentally, this ground of all being is known as sein, being itself, as distinct from being for me, being itself. And our existence, our being in the world, is Dasein. Okay? So what Heidegger wants is to do a phenomenological description of Dasein, our being in the world, to see if the ground of being, being itself, the ground of being appears, you see, is present to us in our Dasein, in our being in the world. Can we gain then some understanding, some awareness of the ground of being from probing our own being in the world? For instance, he has, he has a piece called What is Metaphysics? That was published in 1929. What is Metaphysics? Where he says, of course, it's about sein, being, rather than Dasein. And then he goes about asking questions that have existential moment. Why is there something rather than nothing? Good question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And he tries to capture the existential moment of that question. As if you are hanging over the edge of a cliff, a bottomless precipice, and on the edge of nothingness, are asking, why is there something rather than nothing? In other words, how can I be on this verge of nothingness? Can I ever survive? You see? And so looking through the existential, dread, terror, anguish, to ask what it uncovers. And similarly, in some of the other of his writings, similar sorts of things. But his major work, published in 1927, is called Being and Time. Notice how significant the title is. You see, Being and Time. So the title is Sein und Zeit. Now, being, sure, he wants to get at the nature of being. Time, the temporality of our existence, of our conscious existence in this world, that's what's likely to uncover the existential qualities and stir them up. You see. And in any case, in the Kantian tradition, it's time which structures our conscious existence of anything. So what then is revealed in this? Now, when I say in our being, what is revealed in that, he's not saying what can we infer from it, Descartes style. You say it's not that he's trying to take mental representations and do a causal inference. No, but do we have a direct awareness of the ground of being in the consciousness of our own existence? You see. When you hit rock bottom, is there something there? That's what he's asking. Well, his big project in Being and Time, then, was a phenomenology of Dasein. His intention was to describe these existentialia, the universal structures of consciousness, of being in this world. Universal aspects of it, revealing structures. He only completed half of the project. Part 1, which has to do with temporality and our being, Dasein. Part 2, which was to have to do with temporality and being itself, Sein, he never got done. Why not? Well, it's usually said because he became convinced that this wasn't the method to use. And so it was only half done. The question seems to have been something like this. Even granted that something like being itself is disclosed in our conscious being, how are we going to interpret that? How are we going to understand it? Time may be the structure of our being in the world, but is it the structure of being itself? However would we know? You see? And so he feels that we need to get a more direct kind of approach towards being itself. And that's where he turns to more existential ways, like the why is there something than nothing question. Or to going back to all pre-scientific and pre-philosophical vocabulary, to early Greek before the rise of philosophy, to see if there's something that shows itself in the language of the early Greeks. And he does all sorts of interesting etymologies. I'm trying to get at that. For instance, he asked himself in a little essay called On the Essence of Truth. What is truth? And the etymology that he uses repudiates the conventional view of truth as the correspondence between thought and thing, or as Aquinas put the equation of thought to thing, repudiates that. And etymologically looks at the Greek word aletheia, says there's the alpha privative that negates, and here's the word for a stone or a rock. So truth is saying something about no stone? Yeah, that is to say the rock, the stones are all rolled away, and now you can see what's under them. So truth is the nature of something that shows itself. That is to say, what appears, the being that appears to you in your own existential moment. That is true. And interestingly, how that coincides with our phrase, a moment of truth. A moment of truth. You see, in which you were forced to reveal the sort of person you were. You revealed it to yourself in that moment of truth. Well, let me come back to being and time, however, and a few comments about some of the things he does there, which I think are particularly important. One of the things that immediately becomes evident is that in trying to describe Dasein, one's being in the world, one's conscious existence, inevitably he uses the word I. Yeah, as any other word, his first person. Or perhaps the word you. But he's using the word I not in the sense of a unique individual, but the I is conceived as universal. That is to say, he's looking for the universal dimensions of I-ness, the hyphen. The universality there, not the idiosyncrasy, but the universality. The I is universal. Now, you say that's odd, not if you've read Hegel. Because in Hegel, what you find is that the I, the individual, is a synthesis of the universal and the particular. Remember in his logic, you move from particular, now you move from universal to particular to individual. Yeah. So the individual is the concretized universal, what Hegel called the concrete universal. Universal possibilities, universal characteristics, concretized in the individual. So the I is universal. Now, it seems to me that's a very important notion. Because if you're trying to find universal points of reference in response to relativism, pluralism, and so forth, what he's saying is that even though you may examine the individual, there's something universal about every individual. Now, the universal is not just an empirical generalization about particulars. It's not something you deduce from a collection of particulars. It's something that appears within the particulars. So that you can say that there are certain universal human characteristics of a skeletal thought, which get fleshed out in particular ways in individuals. So the universal and the individual are not separate things. The universal appears in the individual, which is why being can appear within our being in the world, because that is a particular manifestation of being itself. The I is a concrete universal. He uses the word facticity to describe the experience of being sort of a bare fact, insignificant, just an object in this kind of world. He uses the term Vorhandensein to describe the status of something which is just an instrument, a tool used by others. Vorhandensein is to be on hand, something that's on hand, just there to be used. And obviously for human existence, they are very inauthentic kinds of existence. He uses the term existentiality to refer to the possibilities inherent in human existence. Possibilities inherent in human existence. The freedom to be that is contained in human existence. He uses the term forfeiture and fallenness to speak of the experience of forfeiting the kinds of possibilities that human existence involves. He speaks of conscience in those terms.